The mountain man's rifle shot echoed through the canyon like thunder, and Zara Vaughn dropped to her knees behind the overturned wagon, her heart hammering in her chest though she couldn't hear the danger closing in around her. She'd been deaf since birth, living in a world of profound silence, and now that silence might get her killed. The Comanche raiders had attacked her family's small wagon train 3 miles outside of Snowflake, Arizona territory, and she was the only survivor, crouched behind splintered wood and torn canvas while death circled closer. She couldn't hear the war cries or the gunfire, but she could feel the vibrations in the earth beneath her palms, could see the dust kicked up by horses' hooves, could smell the acrid smoke from burning supplies. Her father lay motionless, 20 feet away, her mother beside him, and Zara's throat burned with silent screams she couldn't release because she didn't know if the raiders were close enough to see her. That was when she saw him. A figure emerged from the rocky outcropping above the trail, massive and wild, with shoulder-length dark hair whipping in the hot September wind of 1878. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator despite his size, all broad shoulders and corded muscle visible even through his buckskin clothing. He held a rifle in hands that looked capable of breaking a man in half, and he fired with lethal precision. Zara watched as 3 raiders fell in quick succession, their horses scattering. The mountain man descended the rocks like he was born to them, never losing his footing, never hesitating. He was the most terrifying and magnificent thing Zara had ever seen. The remaining raiders retreated, and suddenly the man was there, towering over her hiding place. He was even bigger up close, easily 6.5 feet tall, with a chest like a barrel and arms thick as fence posts. His face was weathered and hard, dark eyes intense beneath heavy brows, a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark beard. He reached down toward her, and Zara flinched back, but his expression softened fractionally. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear, couldn't understand. She shook her head frantically, pointing to her ears, trying to make him understand. Even as tears finally broke free and streamed down her dust-covered cheeks, the man's dark eyes narrowed, studying her with an intelligence that surprised her. Then he did something unexpected. He slowly placed his rifle against the wagon, holding both hands up where she could see them, palms forward. He pointed to himself, then placed his hand over his heart. He repeated the gesture, slower this time, and Zara understood he was trying to communicate safety, or perhaps introduce himself. She watched his mouth form a word that looked like Isaac. He pointed to himself again, tapped his chest twice. Isaac. His name was Isaac. Zara's hands trembled as she pointed to herself, her lips forming her own name carefully. Zara. She'd been taught to speak by a patient teacher in Boston before her family decided to try their luck in the Arizona territory, though she'd never heard her own voice and couldn't be sure how it sounded. Isaac's expression gentled further, and he nodded. Then he gestured to the destruction around them, his face growing grave. He moved toward her parents' bodies, and Zara wanted to stop him but couldn't find the strength to stand. She watched as he knelt beside each one, checking for life though she knew there was none to find. When he returned to her, his face told her what she already knew. Isaac held out his hand, and after a long moment, Zara took it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip strong but careful as he helped her to her feet. Her legs nearly gave out, and his other hand shot out to steady her at the elbow. He was so warm, so solid, and Zara found herself leaning into that strength for just a moment before she caught herself. Isaac didn't seem to mind. He guided her to a rock where she could sit, then moved with surprising efficiency to gather supplies from the wreckage. Zara watched him work, noticing how he moved with complete awareness of his surroundings, checking the horizon frequently, his body always positioned between her and any potential threat. When he'd assembled a small pile of salvage goods, Isaac returned to her. He crouched down so they were at eye level, and Zara was struck again by how enormous he was, how easily he could hurt her if he wanted to. But there was something in his eyes, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his fierce appearance. He pointed to the mountains to the north, then made a walking motion with his fingers. He pointed to her, then to himself, then to the mountains again. He wanted to take her somewhere, away from this place of death. Zara looked at her parents one last time. Isaac seemed to understand. He stood and spent the next hour digging graves in the hard Arizona soil, his powerful frame laboring under the late afternoon sun. Zara tried to help, but he gently took the makeshift shovel from her hands and shook his head. He pointed to the shade of a juniper tree, gestured for her to rest. She was too exhausted and grief-stricken to argue. When the graves were finished, Isaac helped her lay them to rest. He stood beside her while she said a silent prayer, and though he couldn't know what she was thinking, he bowed his head respectfully. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and red, Isaac loaded his horse with supplies. The animal was as impressive as its master, a huge gray stallion that stood calmly despite the scent of blood and death. Isaac helped Zara mount, then swung up behind her with easy grace. She tensed at the sudden closeness, at the feeling of his solid chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he took the reins. But she was too tired to be afraid, and as the horse began to move, she found herself leaning back into his warmth, letting him support her as the world she'd known burned away behind them. They rode through the night, stopping only once to water the horse at a small creek. Isaac dismounted and helped Zara down, his hands spanning her waist as if she weighed nothing. He offered her water in a tin cup and she drank gratefully. She wanted to ask him questions, wanted to know where they were going, who he was, but she didn't know how. In the moonlight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, mysterious and a little frightening. Yet when he looked at her, there was concern in his eyes, a protectiveness that made something warm unfurl in her chest despite everything. They reached his cabin just as dawn broke over the mountains. It was a sturdy structure built of logs and stone, tucked into a valley beside a clear stream, surrounded by pine trees and towering cliffs. Smoke rose from the chimney, which surprised Zara until Isaac dismounted, and a huge dog came bounding out of the cabin, tail wagging furiously. Isaac's face transformed with a smile that made him look younger, less dangerous. He rubbed the dog's ears affectionately, then gestured for Zara to come meet the animal. The dog was some kind of mastiff mix, with a massive head and gentle brown eyes. It sniffed Zara cautiously, then licked her hand, and she found herself smiling for the first time since the attack. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean, with a large stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, a bed in one corner covered with furs, and shelves lined with supplies. Isaac pointed to the bed, then to Zara, making it clear she should rest there. He pointed to himself, then to the floor, drawing her attention to several thick furs laid out near the fireplace. She wanted to protest, to insist she couldn't take his bed, but exhaustion won out. She removed her dusty boots and lay down, and the last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Isaac banking the fire, the dog settling beside him, both of them keeping watch. When Zara woke, the sun was high in the sky and something smelled wonderful. She sat up to find Isaac at the fireplace, cooking something in a cast-iron pan. He must have sensed her movement because he turned, and when he saw she was awake, he smiled slightly. It wasn't much, just a small lift at the corner of his mouth, but it softened his hard features and made Zara's heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. He dished up food onto tin plates and brought one to her along with a fork. It was venison and potatoes, simply prepared but delicious. Zara ate ravenously, not realizing how hungry she'd been. After breakfast, Isaac cleared the plates and then returned to her with what looked like a book. Zara's heart leaped. Could he read and write? That would make communication so much easier. But when he opened it, she saw it wasn't a book at all, but a journal, mostly blank pages. He produced a pencil and wrote in clear, careful letters. "Can you read?" Zara nearly cried with relief. She nodded eagerly, taking the pencil from him. Her hand shook slightly as she wrote, "Yes. Thank you for saving me. Where are we?" Isaac read her words, then wrote, "My cabin 20 miles north of Snowflake. You are safe here. I am sorry about your family." The sympathy in those simple words made Zara's eyes burn with tears again, but she blinked them back. She wrote, "I have no one left. I don't know what to do." Isaac's jaw tightened as he read her words. He seemed to think for a long moment, then wrote, "You can stay here as long as you need. I will not hurt you. I give you my word." Zara studied his face, trying to read the truth there. Everything about him suggested danger. From his size to the weapons she could see around the cabin to the way he moved like violence was always an option. But his eyes were steady and honest, and he'd buried her parents with respect, had given her his bed, had saved her life without asking for anything in return. She nodded slowly, then wrote, "Thank you. My name is Zara Vaughn. What is your full name?" "Isaac Remington," he wrote. "I have lived in these mountains for 8 years. I trap and hunt. Sometimes I bring furs to Snowflake to trade. I do not see many people." That explained the solitude of his cabin, the self-sufficiency of his existence. Zara wrote, "I cannot hear. I was born deaf. But I can read lips a little if you speak slowly." Isaac nodded, and she saw him mouth the word "understand" with exaggerated care. Then he set the journal aside and pointed to himself. He held up his hand and made a gesture, touching his fingertips to his thumb in sequence. Then he pointed to her questioningly. Zara shook her head, confused. Isaac repeated the gesture, then wrote, Indian Sign Language. The tribes use it to talk across languages. I learned it from the Navajo. I can teach you. Easier than writing everything. Hope bloomed bright and warm in Zara's chest, a way to communicate that was faster than writing, that didn't require pencil and paper. She nodded eagerly, and Isaac's expression softened with something that might have been pleasure. He spent the rest of the day teaching her basic signs. He pointed to himself and made a sign, then wrote, I or me. He pointed to her and made a different sign, you. He pointed to the dog and made another sign, then wrote, dog, his name is Bear. Zara practiced the signs, her fingers clumsy at first, but growing more confident. Isaac was patient, correcting her gently when she got something wrong, nodding approval when she got it right. He taught her signs for basic needs, food, water, sleep, yes, no, help, danger. By the time the sun began to set, Zara's head was spinning with new information, but she felt more hopeful than she had since the attack. She could learn this. She could communicate with this strange, solitary man who'd saved her life. That evening, Isaac cooked dinner while Zara watched, noting how comfortable he was in his own space, how efficiently he moved. She found her eyes drawn to the muscles in his forearms as he worked, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hands could be so gentle despite their obvious strength. When he caught her watching, she felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away. But when she glanced back, there was something in his dark eyes that made her breath catch. After dinner, Isaac gestured to the water bucket and made signs that Zara interpreted as asking if she wanted to wash. She nodded gratefully, suddenly very aware of the dried sweat and dust covering her. Isaac heated water over the fire, then carried the pot outside. Zara followed to find he'd set up a canvas screen near the stream, creating a private washing area. He'd even laid out a bar of soap and a cloth. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. She signed thank you as he'd taught her, and he nodded before heading back inside to give her privacy. The warm water felt like heaven on her battered skin. Zara washed away the grime and blood, trying not to think about why there was blood on her clothes, trying not to remember the sight of her parents lying still and broken. She let herself cry silently while she washed, letting the grief flow through her. When she finally emerged, dressed in her cleanest spare dress from the supplies Isaac had salvaged, she felt raw but slightly more human. Isaac was sitting at the table when she entered, working on something with a piece of leather and a sharp knife. He looked up as she approached, and his eyes traveled over her face with an intensity that made her shiver. He set aside his work and signed, "Are you okay?" It was one of the phrases he'd taught her that afternoon. Zara considered lying, but something about his direct gaze made her want to be honest. She shook her head, then signed, "Sad, but thank you." Isaac's expression grew troubled. He stood and moved toward her, then hesitated, as if asking permission. When Zara didn't retreat, he reached out slowly and placed one large hand on her shoulder, warm and steadying. The gesture was awkward, as if he wasn't used to comforting people, but it meant everything to Zara in that moment. She found herself stepping closer, and then Isaac's arms were around her, careful and strong, and she was crying against his broad chest while he held her. She could feel the rumble in his chest that she guessed was his voice. Speaking words she couldn't hear, but that sounded soothing. His hand moved in slow circles on her back, and Bear pressed against her legs, offering his own comfort. When Zara finally pulled back, embarrassed by her breakdown, Isaac's expression was gentle. He signed, "It is okay to be sad. You are safe here." That night, Zara lay in Isaac's bed again while he took the furs by the fire. But she couldn't sleep, her mind too full of loss and uncertainty and confusing feelings about the mountain man who'd taken her in. She watched him in the firelight, his massive frame relaxed in sleep, Bear's head resting on his stomach. He looked less frightening like this, almost peaceful. Zara wondered about his story, about what had driven him to live alone in these mountains, about whether he was lonely. Finally, as the fire burned down to embers, she drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Isaac began teaching her more signs over breakfast. He was a good teacher, patient and methodical, and Zara was a quick study. He taught her signs for the things around the cabin: fire, wood, knife, gun, horse, mountain, tree, sky. He taught her action signs: eat, drink, sleep, walk, ride, hunt, cook. And he taught her descriptive signs: big, small, hot, cold, good, bad, beautiful, dangerous. When he signed beautiful and then looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse race, Zara felt heat flood her face. She looked down at her plate, suddenly flustered, but when she glanced up again, Isaac was smiling, that small smile that transformed his hard features. Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine. Isaac would leave early to check his trap lines, and Zara would wake to find fresh wood by the fire and water in the bucket. She'd spend her mornings exploring the area immediately around the cabin, always keeping it in sight as Isaac had firmly instructed. The dog bear became her constant companion, never letting her out of his sight. In the afternoons, Isaac would return and they'd practice sign language for hours, their communication growing more fluid and complex every day. Zara learned that Isaac was 30 years old, that he'd come to the mountains after the war, though he didn't elaborate on what had happened to drive him to such solitude. She told him about her life in Boston, about the school for the deaf where she'd learned to read and write, about her parents' dreams of starting fresh in the Arizona Territory. She told him how she'd never quite fit in anywhere, too deaf for the hearing world, but not deaf enough for the deaf community since she could speak and read lips to some extent. Isaac listened to everything she shared, his attention complete and focused in a way no one else had ever given her. "You fit here," he said to her one evening as they sat by the stream watching the sunset. "With me, you fit." Zara's heart clenched at the simple statement. She did fit here, she realized. In this quiet valley with this quiet man, her deafness wasn't a barrier or a burden. It was just part of who she was. Isaac never seemed frustrated when she didn't understand something, never treated her as less than capable. He simply found new ways to communicate, new signs to teach her, new methods of ensuring she knew what was happening around her. As October arrived and the nights grew colder, Zara found herself increasingly aware of Isaac in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude. She noticed how his buckskin shirt stretched across his broad back when he chopped wood, the play of muscles beneath the worn leather. She noticed how gentle his hands could be when he was teaching her a new sign, the same hands that could snap a deer's neck without effort. She noticed how his dark eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. A hunger in them that made her stomach flutter with something that wasn't fear. One morning, Zara woke to find the world outside transformed by the first snow of the season. She pressed her hand against the windowpane, marveling at the whiteness, and felt vibrations that suggested Isaac was moving around the cabin. She turned to find him banking the fire higher, adding more wood. He caught her eye and signed, "Cold today, stay inside, I will bring wood." But as the day progressed and Isaac didn't return from what should have been a short trip to the woodshed, Zara began to worry. She couldn't hear if he was calling for help, couldn't hear if something was wrong. She wrapped herself in a fur cloak Isaac had given her and ventured outside, bare at her heels. She found Isaac at the woodshed, but something was wrong with his leg. Blood stained the snow beside him, and his face was tight with pain. Zara rushed to his side, and Isaac tried to wave her off, signing one-handed that he was fine. But Zara could see the deep gash in his thigh, probably from a falling axe or a slipped knife. She signed emphatically, "No, not fine, come inside now." Isaac looked startled by her forcefulness, but he let her help him back to the cabin, leaning heavily on her shoulder. Once inside, she pointed firmly at the chair and he sat, looking bemused. Zara had watched her mother tend enough injuries to know what to do. She heated water, found clean cloths, and located the whiskey Isaac kept for medicinal purposes. When she approached with the whiskey, Isaac signed, "This will hurt." "I know," Zara signed back. "Be strong, mountain man." Isaac's lips quirked at the nickname, and then Zara was pouring whiskey over the wound, and he was gripping the chair arms hard enough to make the wood creak. She worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the wound and binding it tightly. When she finished, Isaac's face was pale beneath his tan, but he signed, "Thank you, you did good work, you took care of me," Zara signed back. "Now I take care of you." Something shifted between them in that moment, some balance of power and trust that moved them from rescuer and rescued to something approaching equals. Isaac's hand caught hers as she moved to take away the bloody cloths, his fingers threading through hers. His dark eyes held hers, intense and questioning, and Zara's breath caught. She could feel the calluses on his palm, the heat of his skin, the slight tremor that suggested he was as affected by the touch as she was. "Zara," he signed with his free hand, and there was a question in it, in the way he looked at her. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer until she was standing between his knees, her hand still caught in his. Isaac's free hand came up slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, and cupped her cheek. His palm was rough and warm, and Zara found herself leaning into the touch. She could see her name on his lips again, soft and wondering. Then he was pulling her down gently, and she was kneeling beside his chair, and his forehead was pressed to hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, and Zara felt something settle deep in her chest, something that felt like coming home. Isaac's recovery took several weeks, during which he was forced to rest and let Zara handle more of the daily tasks. She learned to chop wood, though her pieces were nowhere near as neat as his. She learned to care for the horse and check the nearest trap lines. She learned to shoot Isaac's rifle, standing between his braced legs as he showed her how to sight down the barrel, his arms around her steadying her aim. She couldn't hear the shot, but she felt the recoil and saw the can she'd been aiming at fly backward. Isaac's grin was brilliant and proud, and Zara felt warmth bloom in her chest at having earned it. The physical closeness necessitated by Isaac's injury made Zara hyper-aware of him in ways that kept her awake at night. She'd insisted he take the bed while he recovered, and she'd taken the furs by the fire, but she found herself lying awake thinking about him just feet away. Did he think about her the way she thought about him? Did his hands ache to touch her the way hers ached to touch him? The attraction between them was becoming harder to ignore, a tension that hummed in the air whenever they were near each other. One evening in late October, as Zara was helping Isaac change the bandage on his healing leg, his hand caught her wrist gently. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse race. He signed slowly, carefully. "I need to tell you something." Zara's heart hammered. She signed back, "What?" Isaac took a deep breath, and she saw the rise and fall of his massive chest. "I know I am not a gentleman. I live rough. I do not have fine things or soft words. But you make this place feel like home. You make me want things I thought I would never have again. You are beautiful and strong and brave. I think about you all the time. I want you to stay. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be here. With me." Zara's eyes burned with tears, but they were good tears this time. Her hands trembled as she signed, "I want to stay. I have never felt as much myself as I do here with you. You do not see my deafness as something wrong. You learned my language. You speak to me with your hands. No one has ever done that before. Then you will stay?" Isaac signed, and there was vulnerability in his strong face that made Zara's heart ache. "Yes," she signed. Then, because it felt important to say it aloud too, she spoke the word, hoping it came out right. "Yes." Isaac's face transformed with a smile that was incandescent. He pulled her closer, careful of his injured leg, until she was kneeling between his thighs. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs stroking her cheeks. Then he leaned down slowly, watching her eyes for permission. Zara's heart felt like it might burst from her chest as she lifted her face to his. The first touch of his lips was gentle, almost tentative, as if he feared she might break. But Zara pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and claiming. Isaac's arms banded around her, pulling her up into his lap despite his injury, and Zara went willingly, losing herself in the taste and heat of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac pressed his forehead to hers. He signed against her back. "I will court you properly, build you a better cabin, make you my wife if you will have me, yes." Zara signed, laughing and crying at the same time, yes to all of it. That night, Zara returned to sleeping in Isaac's bed, but this time he joined her, pulling her back against his chest and wrapping his powerful arms around her. It was innocent, just holding, but it felt more intimate than anything Zara had ever experienced. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back, the rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of him surrounding her. She'd never felt safer or more cherished in her life. As winter descended on the mountains in earnest, Isaac began planning their future. He showed Zara the spot where he wanted to build a larger cabin, one with multiple rooms and glass windows and a real kitchen. He took her to Snowflake on his horse, introducing her to the few people he did business with there. The townspeople were clearly shocked to see the reclusive mountain man with a woman, but Isaac ignored their stares, keeping Zara close to his side with a possessive hand at her back. He bought her fabric for dresses, a new winter coat, books to read, and a beautiful hand mirror. When the shopkeeper looked at her strangely after she didn't respond to a question, Isaac signed to her and then told the shopkeeper firmly, "She is deaf. You will speak to me or write to her, and you will treat her with respect." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Zara fall a little more in love with him. On the ride back to the cabin, she wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her cheek to his broad back, content in a way she'd never imagined possible. December brought heavy snows that sometimes trapped them in the cabin for days at a time. But Zara didn't mind. She and Isaac would spend hours by the fire, him teaching her more complex signs, her teaching him the proper way to darn socks and make bread that didn't come out like rocks. They played cards and checkers. They read books together, taking turns with the single lamp, and they grew more comfortable with physical affection, stealing kisses when the mood struck, holding hands for no reason, touching casually as they moved around the small space. One snowy evening, as they sat tangled together on the furs before the fire, Isaac's expression grew serious. He shifted so he could sign clearly, "I want to tell you why I came to the mountains, why I left the world behind." Zara nodded, giving him her full attention. She could feel the tension in his frame, the old pain rising to the surface. "I was a soldier in the war," Isaac signed. "I did terrible things, saw terrible things. When I came home, I could not bear to be around people. The noise, the crowds, the questions. I felt like I was still fighting, still waiting for the next battle. So I came here where it is quiet and I could be alone with my thoughts. I built this cabin and I trapped and hunted and I thought I would live this way until I died. But then you came and everything changed. You brought life back to me. You gave me a reason to want more than just survival." Tears streamed down Zara's face as she signed back. "The world is silent for me always, but you make my silence beautiful instead of lonely. You filled my quiet with meaning, with love." Isaac kissed her then, deep and thorough, his big hands cradling her face like she was something precious. When he pulled back, he signed, "Marry me, Zara Vaughn, be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Zara signed, laughing through her tears. "Yes, Isaac Remington, I will marry you." They rode into Snowflake 2 days later, as soon as the weather cleared, and found the circuit preacher who was wintering in town. The man agreed to marry them the next day, giving them time to make arrangements. Isaac bought Zara a simple gold ring from the jeweler, and she bought him a new shirt from the general store, the only gift she could think to give him. They spent the night at the small boarding house, in separate rooms to preserve propriety for one last night. The wedding was simple, held in the small church with only a handful of witnesses present. Isaac had scrubbed clean and tamed his long hair as much as possible, and he looked magnificent in his new shirt. Zara wore her best dress, her hair pinned up with careful attention. The preacher spoke words she couldn't hear, but Isaac signed the important parts to her as they progressed through the ceremony. When the preacher indicated it was time for the vows, Isaac took both her hands in his and signed slowly, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "I promise to protect you and provide for you. I promise to learn new signs whenever you need them. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. You are my heart, Zara." Zara's hands shook as she signed back. "I promise to stand beside you always. I promise to make our house a home. I promise to love you with everything I am. You are my voice, Isaac. You speak my language." The preacher pronounced them married, and Isaac kissed her in front of everyone, a claiming kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. When they broke apart, his eyes were suspiciously bright, and Zara knew hers were too. They signed to the register their names side by side, making it official. Zara Vaughn was now Zara Remington, wife of a mountain man, and she'd never been happier. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, and for the first time, Zara understood what it meant to belong completely to another person. Isaac was gentle and patient, his big hands reverent as they learned every inch of her. In the lamplight, his muscled body was a landscape of scars and strength, and Zara traced each mark with fingers and lips, claiming him as thoroughly as he claimed her. When they finally joined together, Zara looked into Isaac's eyes and saw her whole future reflected there. The pleasure built slowly between them, a crescendo she felt in every nerve, and when she finally shattered in his arms, she cried out his name, not caring how it sounded, because she could see the effect it had on him in the way his eyes went dark with need. Afterward, Isaac held her close and signed against her shoulder. "My wife, mine yours." Zara signed back, pressing a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Always yours." They returned to the cabin the next day to begin their married life in earnest. Winter was a time of quiet intimacy, of learning each other's rhythms and quirks. Zara discovered that Isaac sang while he worked, not aware he was doing it since he had no audience. She couldn't hear it, but she could see the vibrations in his throat, the movement of his lips. When she told him, he looked embarrassed, but she signed that she loved knowing he was happy enough to sing. Isaac discovered that Zara had nightmares sometimes about the attack, and he learned to wake her gently, holding her until the fear passed, signing reassurances until she calmed. As spring arrived and the snows melted, Isaac began work on their new cabin. True to his word, he was building something far grander than his bachelor quarters. Zara helped where she could, amazed by his skill with wood and stone. He built her a proper kitchen with a big stove and many shelves. He built a bedroom separate from the main living space, with a real bed frame he'd ordered from Snowflake. He built her a reading nook by a window that looked out over the valley. Every detail was chosen with her in mind, and Zara felt treasured in a way that brought frequent tears to her eyes. By summer, the cabin was finished, and it was beautiful. They moved their belongings in together, and that first night in their new home, Isaac carried Zara over the threshold despite her laughing protests. He set her down in the main room and signed, "Our home, yours and mine, may we fill it with love and laughter and children, children." Zara signed, her heart skipping. They'd never discussed it directly, though she'd hoped. "Many children, if you want them," Isaac signed, his expression tender. "Strong sons and beautiful daughters who will grow up knowing they are loved." Zara launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck and her legs around his waist, and Isaac caught her easily, laughing as he carried her to their new bedroom. That night, they loved each other in their own bed in their own home, and Zara felt so full of joy she thought she might burst with it. The summer passed in happy contentment. Zara planted a garden that flourished under her care. Isaac's trap lines did well, and he was able to trade for luxuries like coffee and sugar and fabric for new curtains. They made friends with a Navajo family who lived in the area, and Zara learned even more signs from them, discovering a rich community of hand communication she'd never known existed. The Navajo woman who introduced herself as Ayasha became a friend, teaching Zara about the plants that grew in the area and their uses. Ayasha's husband taught Isaac better hunting techniques, and their children played with Bear, filling the valley with life and motion. In late August, Zara realized she'd missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then told Isaac one evening as they sat watching the sunset. She signed simply, "I am with child." Isaac went completely still, his dark eyes wide. Then he signed, "Truly, truly," Zara signed back, smiling at his expression of stunned joy. Isaac let out a whoop that she felt more than heard, then scooped her up and spun her around, careful despite his exuberance. When he set her down, he dropped to his knees and pressed his face to her still flat stomach. His big hands splayed across her back. Zara ran her fingers through his long hair, love swelling so large in her chest she thought she might die from the sweetness of it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Isaac became even more protective than usual, insisting Zara rest frequently, bringing her special treats from town, making sure she was always warm and comfortable. Ayasha visited often, bringing herbs and advice, teaching Zara what to expect and how to prepare. As Zara's belly grew round with their child, she would catch Isaac staring at her with such wonder and love that it made her want to cry. In March of 1880, as the snows began to melt again, Zara went into labor. Isaac had ridden to fetch Ayasha at the first signs, and the Navajo woman arrived quickly, taking charge with calm efficiency. Isaac stayed by Zara's side throughout, holding her hand, signing encouragement, wiping her face with cool cloths. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Zara thought she couldn't continue. But Isaac's steady presence kept her grounded, his hands speaking love and strength when she needed it most. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that Zara couldn't hear but could see in the movement of his tiny mouth and the pleased expressions of Ayasha and Isaac. Isaac cut the cord with trembling hands, and then Ayasha was placing the baby in Zara's arms, and she was looking down at the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. He had Isaac's dark hair and her light eyes, and he was perfect. "Our son?" Isaac signed, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names throughout the pregnancy, and Zara had a favorite ready. She signed, "James." "James Remington James," Isaac repeated, trying out the name. Then he smiled, that brilliant smile that still made Zara's heart skip. "It is perfect, he is perfect, you are perfect." Isaac was a devoted father from the first moment. He fashioned a cradle board in the Navajo style so Zara could carry James while she worked. He carved wooden toys for his son and sang songs Zara couldn't hear, but knew were beautiful from the expression on his face. He was endlessly patient with the sleepless nights and the crying, taking turns with Zara so she could rest. Watching him with their son, so gentle despite his size and strength, made Zara fall in love with him all over again. As James grew from infant to toddler, Isaac taught him signs alongside spoken words, ensuring their son would be able to communicate with his mother. James's first sign was Mama, and Zara cried happy tears when he made it deliberately, his chubby hands forming the symbol she'd taught him. His second sign was Papa, and Isaac's face lit up like the sun. The three of them developed their own language of signs and gestures and love, and Zara marveled at the family they'd built together. When James was 2 years old, Zara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Isaac was less surprised but no less joyful. He immediately began working on an addition to the cabin, creating a room specifically for the children. James helped his father work, toddling around with his own toy hammer, and Isaac patiently answered his constant stream of questions with both words and signs. Their daughter was born in November of 1882, an easier birth than James had been. She came into the world with a full head of blonde hair like Zara's mother had once had, and her father's dark eyes. They named her Rose, after the wild roses that grew near the stream in summer. If anything, Isaac was even more smitten with his daughter than he'd been with his son. The big rough mountain man became putty in the hands of his tiny girl, and Zara teased him mercilessly about it. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work and deep contentment. James grew tall and strong like his father, learning to hunt and trap and care for the land. Rose was bright and curious, always exploring, always questioning. Both children were perfectly bilingual and spoke in English and sign language, switching between them effortlessly. They thought nothing of their mother's deafness because it had always been part of their world, as natural as the mountains that surrounded their valley. When James was 7 and Rose was 5, Zara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Henry and Hope. Isaac was beside himself with joy, carrying both babies around the cabin, one in each massive arm, looking simultaneously terrified and delighted. The older children were fascinated by their new siblings, helping to care for them with the seriousness of purpose that children bring to important tasks. The cabin was full of life and noise and constant motion, and sometimes Zara would stand in the doorway watching her family and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she'd been given. She'd lost everything in that attack on the trail outside Snowflake, but she'd gained so much more. She'd found a partner who spoke her language, who'd learned to communicate with his hands because words couldn't reach her. She'd found a home in the wilderness, a place where her deafness was just another part of the landscape, neither ignored nor overly emphasized. She'd found love, deep and abiding and true. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after the children were all in bed, Isaac took Zara's hand and signed, "Do you remember that first day, when I found you by the wagon?" Zara nodded. It was burned into her memory forever, every detail crystal clear. "I saw you hiding," Isaac signed, "and I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even covered in dust and fear. Then I realized you could not hear me, and I thought my heart would break for you. But you were so strong, so brave. You did not let the silence defeat you. I knew in that moment that I would do anything to protect you, to help you, to learn how to speak to you. I did not know I would fall in love with you. I did not know you would become my whole world, but you did. You are." Tears streamed down Zara's face as she signed back. "I saw a wild man who terrified me and saved me in the same moment. I thought I would never be able to talk to you, never be able to thank you. Then you picked up that pencil and asked if I could read, and I knew you were different. You did not see my deafness as something to fix or pity. You just learned my language. You spoke with your hands, and with every sign you learned, I fell more in love with you. You gave me a voice, Isaac. You gave me a life. You gave me everything." Isaac pulled her close, and they sat together as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, their hands intertwined, speaking the language of love that needed no words. Bear, graying now but still devoted, lay at their feet. From inside the cabin came the faint sounds of the children stirring, and Isaac sighed with contentment. "Should we have more?" he signed teasingly. "Make it an even 6? Zara laughed and shoved his shoulder. "4 is plenty, mountain man. You just want an excuse to build another addition to the cabin." "Maybe," Isaac signed, his eyes twinkling. "Or maybe I just love you and cannot help wanting to create more life with you." "Sweet talker," Zara signed. But she was smiling. As the years continued to pass, their family became a fixture in the area around Snowflake. The Remington children were known to be wild but well-mannered, equally comfortable in town or in the mountains. Isaac and Zara's unusual love story became something of a legend, the tale of the mountain man who learned to speak with his hands for his deaf wife, spreading throughout the territory. Young couples would sometimes make the journey to their cabin to meet them, to see proof that love could overcome any obstacle. That communication was more than just spoken words. James grew into a man much like his father, tall and powerful and gentle-hearted. He married a girl from Snowflake when he was 22, a pretty blonde named Sarah, who learned sign language before the wedding so she could speak with her mother-in-law. They built a cabin nearby, and Isaac helped his son construct it with the same care he'd put into his own home. Watching James with Sarah, seeing the love between them, Isaac would sign to Zara. He learned from the best. He knows how to love a woman properly. Rose grew into a beautiful, spirited young woman who could outshoot most men and had a gift with horses. She fell in love with a Navajo man named Kai, Ayesha's nephew, and the wedding was a beautiful blend of cultures and traditions. Rose wore white but was married in a traditional Navajo ceremony, and the celebration lasted 3 days. Kai already knew sign language, and he and Zara could converse easily, making Isaac relax about giving his daughter to another man. The twins, Henry and Hope, were inseparable growing up. Henry became a skilled trapper like his father, while Hope had a gift for healing, learning everything Ayesha could teach her about herbs and medicine. Both eventually married and built cabins in the valley, creating a small family compound. The valley that had once been Isaac's solitary refuge became home to 3 generations of Remingtons, filled with grandchildren and noise and laughter. Through it all, Isaac and Zara remained the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew older together, Isaac's dark hair turning silver, Zara's blonde hair fading to white. Isaac's shoulders remained broad even as his face grew more lined, and Zara's hands remained steady and quick with signs even as arthritis began to stiffen her fingers. They still communicated primarily through sign, though their children and grandchildren could translate when needed. But Isaac never stopped learning new signs, never stopped finding new ways to tell Zara he loved her. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration. The entire valley gathered, along with friends from Snowflake and the surrounding area. There was food and music and dancing, and though Zara couldn't hear the music, Isaac spun her around the makeshift dance floor anyway, their bodies moving together with the ease of long practice. Later, as they sat surrounded by their children and grandchildren, James stood to make a speech. "I want to talk about my parents," he said, signing as he spoke so Zara could understand. "Growing up, I never thought it was strange that my mother could not hear. It was just how things were. But as I got older, I realized how remarkable their love story truly is. My father could have left my mother by that wagon. He could have brought her to town and left her with the church. Instead, he brought her home. He learned her language. He built her a life. And my mother, she could have been afraid of this big, rough mountain man. She could have left as soon as she was able. Instead, she stayed. She loved him. She built a home with him. They taught all of us that communication is more than words, that love is more than grand gestures. Love is learning someone else's language. Love is speaking with your hands when words will not work. Love is building a life together, one day at a time, one sign at a time. So I want to thank you both for showing us what real love looks like, for teaching us that any obstacle can be overcome if 2 people are willing to do the work." By the time James finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. Isaac pulled Zara close and signed, "He is right. You are my greatest adventure, my greatest joy. 25 years and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Only 25? Zara signed back, her eyes twinkling. "I expect at least 25 more, mountain man." "Anything you want," Isaac signed. "Everything you want, always." And he was true to his word. They had many more years together, watching their family grow and flourish, maintaining the home they'd built with love and determination. Isaac remained strong well into his 60s, still hunting and trapping, though the younger generation did most of the heavy work now. Zara remained sharp and active, still tending her garden, still making the cabin a warm and welcoming place for anyone who needed it. When Isaac finally began to slow down in his late 60s, it was subtle at first. He tired more easily, moved a bit slower, but he never stopped signing to Zara, never stopped finding ways to make her smile. On the morning of his 70th birthday, he woke Zara with kisses and signed, "45 years I have known you, 44 years I have been your husband. And still, every morning when I wake up next to you, I cannot believe how lucky I am." "Sweet talker," Zara signed. The same thing she'd been signing to him for decades. "What do you want for breakfast?" They spent that day surrounded by family, 4 generations now gathered in the valley. Great-grandchildren toddled around on unsteady legs, climbing all over Isaac like he was a favorite mountain. He bore it with good humor, signing to them even though most were still too young to understand. As the sun set and the family began to disperse to their own homes, Isaac and Zara sat on their porch, the same spot where they'd spent countless evenings over the years. I want to tell you something, Isaac signed, his movements slower now but no less clear. What? Zara signed back. If I had to do it all over, if I could go back to that day on the trail, I would make the same choice every time. I would save you. I would bring you home. I would learn your language. Because loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You took a broken soldier and made him whole. You took a lonely cabin and made it a home. You took silence and made it sing. I love you, Zara Remington. I have loved you from the first moment I saw you, and I will love you until my last breath. Zara was crying now, her hands shaking as she signed back. And I love you, Isaac Remington. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You learned to speak with your hands because words could not reach me. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You never made me feel less than because of my deafness. You just loved me. How could I not love you back with everything I am? They held each other as the stars came out overhead, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Isaac lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78 with Zara's hand in his. The family gathered to mourn him, but also to celebrate the extraordinary life he'd lived and the legacy he'd left behind. They buried him on a hill overlooking the valley he'd loved, with a headstone that read, Isaac Remington, husband, father, mountain man. He spoke with his hands and loved with his whole heart. Zara lived on for several more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never remarried, never wanted to. Isaac had been her one great love, and that was enough for a lifetime. She spent her remaining years teaching the youngest generation sign language, telling them stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive. She would often sit on the porch at sunset, as she and Isaac had done so many times, and her hands would move through signs seemingly of their own accord, still speaking to the man she'd loved for nearly 50 years. When Zara finally passed in her sleep at the age of 83, her daughter Rose was with her. Rose later told her siblings that their mother's last sign had been Isaac and she'd been smiling. They buried her next to Isaac on the hill, with a matching headstone that read, Zara Remington, wife, mother, heart of the valley. She could not hear, but she listened with her soul. The Remington family continued to thrive in the valley for generations, and the story of Isaac and Zara became the foundation myth of the family, told and retold to each new generation. The story of how a mountain man found a deaf woman by a burning wagon and learned to speak her language with his hands. The story of how silence and solitude found their perfect complement in each other. The story of how love could overcome any barrier when two people were willing to do the work. The cabin they'd built together still stood, maintained carefully by descendants who understood its significance. The valley they'd filled with life and laughter remained in the family, a testament to what two determined people could create together. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the pines just right, locals swore they could still see two figures on the porch, hands moving through the twilight, speaking the language of love that transcended sound, transcended time, transcended everything but the eternal bond between two souls who had found each other against all odds. In the end, their love story wasn't about overcoming deafness or taming a wild man or surviving the harsh realities of the frontier. It was about two people who learned to communicate in the ways that mattered, who built a life together one day at a time, who proved that the deepest connections don't require words at all. It was about a man who learned to speak with his hands because the woman he loved could not hear. And it was about a woman who found her voice through those same hands, who discovered that silence could be full of meaning when shared with the right person. Isaac and Zara Remington's love story became legend in the Arizona Territory and beyond, a reminder that true communication comes from the heart, not the voice, that love is action, not just words, that the most profound connections are built through patience, dedication, and the willingness to learn another person's language, whether that language is spoken with the voice or signed with the hands. And in the end, that was their greatest legacy. Not just the family they created or the valley they populated, but the lesson they taught everyone who knew them that love finds a way, always, if two people are brave enough to reach for it with open hands and open hearts.